From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. This is Andre Johnson.
Junior.
Do not forget the JR at the end of the name. It's very important to remember the Junior. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And this is the week that keeps on giving when it comes to fire content. Because since the last time we spoke on Monday, even more things have happened with your New Orleans Saints. Happy Hump Day, everyone. If you are watching us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, thank you for finding us on this wonderful network. Andre, so you got the NOLA Gold representing.
Repping the team, you know.
I like it. How you feeling?
You know, Sean, I was doing good until about 5 minutes ago, and it dawned on me. Before I left home, my wife told me to take the salmon out the freezer. I did not take the salmon out the freezer.
It's like the loneliest feeling ever. It's
Can't do anything
this
about it.
beautiful idea for dinner and not going to be thought out in time. Oh, well, I hope y'all figured it out at the Johnson household. As for me, it has been a very, very, very busy week. It's only Wednesday. Another busy Wednesday. We can go in a lot of different directions here, but we have not talked to you at this platform since the Saints made a big-time trade deadline deal. They were sellers, not buyers. And, of course, by now you know. Marshon Lattimore, kind of fitting on Election Day, heads to the nation's capital in exchange for a couple of draft picks as the Saints make the move with Lattimore. That's where we're going with the big picture today. They had a busy day out on Airliner Drive. I'm going to get to that as well. We could have done either one as the big picture, but because we haven't spoke about Marshon Lattimore, I thought that was appropriate to go there first.
Right, Marshon Lattimore, part of that iconic 2017 Saints draft class, one of the greatest of all time and definitely one of the greatest in Saints history. Traded to the Washington Commanders on Tuesday. It was Lattimore and a 5th-round pick, and in return, the Saints got a 3rd-round pick. They got a 4th-round pick, and they got their own 6th-round pick back that they sent Washington in the trade for John Ridgeway earlier this season. So Lattimore and a 5th for a 3rd, a 4th, and a 6th. Sean, who won the trade, and do you like the deal for the Saints?
Okay, yeah, well, I'm going to get to it because this is what I do. I get to the layers of this because, this has been talked about for a while, and the Saints don't always do this. Usually when they're making a deal, they're trying to bring in. Now they're selling off, which tells you, without telling you, where they feel like they truly are with this season and this franchise. So let's start with let the rebuilding begin.
Yep.
I think that's obvious. Even if they don't want to say it. They're going to try their butts off for the next 8 weeks because you got Darren Rizzi, and this is a great audition for them. But make no mistake about it, this team is fully invested in the future. Last couple moves over the last couple days certainly emphasize that. Marshon Lattimore, though, it's a complex one for me. It really is. It really is because there's so many things that you have to explain when you talk about Marshon Lattimore. In my opinion, watched this team for a long time, covered this team for a long time. He is the best cornerback in Saints history. The best cornerback in Saints history. I am a voter in the Saints Hall of Fame committee, selection committee. When his time comes up, he will get my vote probably right away. When he's immediately eligible for the Saints Hall of Fame. He was awesome from the day he got here. And I know there's been a whole lot of discrepancies over the Saints taking him, and they almost traded Patrick Mahomes, blah, blah, blah. That's fun to talk about. We want to revise history, but the bottom line is Lattimore came here, and Lattimore produced. Major player in the reboot of the franchise from that 2017 to 2020 window that catapulted them back into relevancy after 3 straight years of 7-9. Some thought, look, we dealt with him. Some thought he was hard to talk to, like as media members. I love talking to him. I love talking to him after a game. I love talking to him in the locker room. His voice, the way he just kind of expressed things, he was so raw, so kind of rugged. But real. I mean, he was gritty. To me, he kind of matched A, his position, and B, kind of a position in this city. I felt like he had really captured the right tone whenever he spoke. So I loved it. I loved dealing with Marshon Lattimore, and he was an incredibly productive player. 15 picks over his time here. But at the same time, This had to happen.
Yeah.
This absolutely had to happen. As much of a dog, in a good way, as I think Marshon Lattimore has been throughout his time here, the last few years, whether it was injuries or just lack of success, when I think of players with bad body language, when I think of players that may have been there but not there, may have been checked out a little bit, I gotta be real. He's at near the top of my list. He always came across as that way over the last couple seasons. So, you know, it's going to be the biggest tell if that was indeed the case.
If he
let's
plays,
see if that hamstring heals up real
exactly.
fast. Let's see if the hamstring hamstring happens to heal up real fast. That's just the truth. I mean, you can tell two truths at the same time, and he was an awesome player, but I feel like the last couple of years he's been a little distant, and he's kind of floated a little bit. And I think, honestly, with his injuries and his lack of success, I just think it led to a little bit of a checked-out body language, and I think you saw that in certain spots throughout the season, even when he was healthy. But again, things got bad. He pulled a hamstring, which is something that's pretty common with him. But something clearly had to have happened between he and DA. They wouldn't have redid the contract last year towards the end of the year had that not been the case. Sometimes it's just time. Sometimes it's just time. You've been here a long time, almost 8 full seasons, and sometimes it's just good for everyone involved to move on. Saying that with Lattimore, clearly they said that with Dennis Allen. And frankly, the Saints are rebuilding. And this, back to the original question, is it a good move? I think this is a fantastic start. I think this is a very good start to what could be the Saints' deep rebuilding process. First came Dennis Allen, then came Marshon Lattimore. In return, as you said, you get the 3, you get the 4, your original 6 for Lattimore, and a 5. So you got a first-round pick, a second-round pick, 2 thirds, 2 fourths, 2 sixes or 1 6 and a 7. That's a big draft class, and get all those 6 picks in the first 4 rounds. That's some quality football players you can get and really add some quality depth and some quality football players to your roster, which is what you need. Young, competent, talented football players. That's what you need. Quality and quantity, frankly, because they just don't have enough of them. I remember potting about compensation for Lattimore. I don't know, it was a few months back. We were talking about what we would want back then when this first came out. We were both pretty steadfast back then, off-season. Saints had to get a 2, had to get a 2, had to get a 2. And if a 3 was the best offer, then they would have had to add more picks in addition to the 3. It couldn't just be a 3 solo. They got 2 more. Now, I know it's the one that they gave away for John Ridgeway, but you basically got Ridgeway for free now, including the 3rd and a 4th-round pick. That's a high day 3 pick. That's a late day 2 pick. That you can do a lot with that, and obviously their original 6. If used correctly, they can find some quality football players with this next big class to reset this franchise going forward, because like it or not, that has to happen. Finally, I feel like the organization sees that and is on board with that, with a move like Lattimore and obviously the move with Dennis Allen. All in all, good deal for the Saints, because I think Lattimore truly has about 2 more years left at the top of his game. I don't know. He's not the same player he was a few years ago. Injuries have kind of robbed him a little bit. But I think he's got 2 years of being a really, really, really good cornerback in the NFL, and you'll probably see him fade a little bit after that. And for what you could possibly get with a couple of those players with the draft picks and what he was costing you, and to get that off your books after next season, I think all in all, it's a pretty good deal for the Saints.
You know, the deal, the first word that came to my mind when I saw it, it was refreshing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times in the last few years, we've seen the Saints front office make deals to keep older players and make sure that they retire with this team. We saw it with Cam Jordan. We saw it with Tyrann Mathieu. Heck, we just saw it with Alvin Kamara. They'll sign the older player to a big money deal and keep him here long term so that he can retire with the Saints. And it's a great gesture for some of the greatest players in your franchise's history. And that is what Marshon Lattimore is. Like you said, I agree. He's the best cornerback to ever come through New Orleans. Easily. I don't think there's much competition with the Saints in that organization. But there are so many great players that don't finish their careers with the team that they made a name for.
Right.
Tom Brady didn't finish in
Yeah.
New England, Peyton Manning didn't finish in
It's
Indianapolis.
not a requirement.
Yeah,
you
Adrian
know?
Peterson left Minnesota to come here. You
Right.
know, it happened. So when you look at Marshon Lattimore being traded, I agree, it had to happen. And I think you got pretty good compensation for him. A guy who the last few years for him has been riddled by injuries. His performance when he plays has been at the top of his game, but I mean, he hasn't been able to play as often as one might hope. He is getting older. Like you said, he's really only got about 2 or 3 years as one of the best corners in the NFL. So I think getting a third or fourth and your own sixth back, I like that they got their own sixth and not Washington's sixth, because the Saints' sixth is going to be a lot closer to the front than Washington, who's currently 7-2. Wherever they wind up finishing on the season, it's going to be a lot further back than the Saints. And I just think it's step one towards potentially blowing this team up and finally starting that rebuild towards the future. Because I don't know, at least in my lifetime that I've been watching the Saints, if they've ever had a true rebuild. You know, they've retooled a lot in the last 20 years, but they haven't really started from the ground floor and rebuilt, you know. So Marshon was the first. I'd be shocked if he wasn't the last. I'm sure there are going to be, as we get throughout the season and into the off season, there's going to be a lot more familiar faces that move on so that the Saints can inevitably start this rebuild. Because I talked about it a few episodes ago, Sean, on this podcast. You got a lot to rebuild. This isn't just hey, we just got to have a good draft class, maybe get a franchise quarterback, and we're right back in the championship picture. You got to pretty much look at every position on this team and start to bring in young, competent, talented players, whether it's to start or whether it's for depth purposes outside of corner, and that's an asterisk by corner because that kind of hinges on what happens with Paulson Adebo and what that position looks like. Really, every position needs a breath of fresh air, and that's the task that the Saints organization is going to look forward to for the next few years.
And frankly, they're not going to get it all next offseason. I mean, they'll sign a few guys, and they're going to get a nice sized draft class, but you're not going to get it all. And words to the wise, very rarely does a rebuild happen like 2006, where you catch lightning in a bottle and you go 10-6, and there's all these other factors at play, and you probably play a little bit better than you actually are, and it just sort of gives a view of how to turn a franchise around that may not necessarily mesh with the normal course of action in the NFL. Most of the time, it's like the Lions. They had to go like 0-11 the first year with Dan Campbell, but I think they finished like 3-13. I don't know if they were still playing 17 games back then, and then steadily get to where they're at now. And there's no guarantee you get to where they're at now, but you gotta start. You gotta start somewhere. You've held on to this era as long as possible. As for Marshon Lattimore, he goes to a contender, so we'll finish out this season. And I look, they're taking his contract on, so the base salary is so he's under contract next year with them as well. The Saints, his dead money cap hit will accelerate next year, but so he'll be on their books dead money wise, but he'll also the cap number wouldn't be quite as great just because of that base salary coming off the books. I don't get too much numbers on you. It's not a huge cap saving, but nonetheless, it's a little bit. I checked with some Saints people on that. And like you said, it's just a matter of you got to get a deal done, and you got to start somewhere. And who are your most tradable assets? And if I'm looking at the Saints, he's the only one. I mean, you can look at Olave, but Olave may not play football again. Who knows? Who else? I mean, could you really do something with Alvin? I know he just signed that contract, but a 30-year-old running back or soon-to-be 30-year-old running back, I guess you could, but I don't know why you would do that. Chase Young was the other name that was thrown out there, and I'm sure they've got some phone calls about him because pass rushers are pass rushers, and you need them. But all in all, I think that's the guy everyone pinpointed, and that it's been out there for quite some time. And Lattimore wouldn't have been willing to adjust the contract if he didn't feel like this is a good thing for him to go somewhere. And he didn't just go just anywhere. The Saints controlled it, and they got the best deal from Washington. And Darren Rizzi said today they got calls from a lot of teams, and this was the best deal they got offered. So, look, ultimately it's a good deal, but it's only going to be a really good deal if these draft picks turn into something. And that's the other piece of the puzzle we don't know yet, is who they ultimately end up being and who are the people responsible for choosing the players they ultimately end up being. Different story for a different day, but it's a part of the process. It's a good step, but there's still a lot between now and when they actually make these selections to know whether or not this is a a great trade for the Saints because at some point you can't just make the deal for the draft picks. You got to hit on the draft picks, and that has been an issue over the last couple seasons.
Right. Like you said, we don't know who they're picking. We don't even know who will be doing the picking. And when they get picked, we don't know who will be the head coach. But for right now, we know Darren Rizzi has stepped in as the interim head coach for the Saints. You spent the afternoon on Airline Drive at the Saints facility. You kind of got to peek in at the first Rizzi-led practice for the Saints. What was kind of the energy or some of the things that you noticed from being out there?
They're just, it was different, and I think that was I know that was by design. They told us about that. I mean, even to the point of the offense and defense switch sides. It's just every little normal routine that you had, you got to shake it up. You got to be willing to embrace the shake up. And I think, Derek Carr talked about that as well. So you go out there, and the offense is on the side near the weight room, and the defense is on the side closer to us. And this is just a minor tweak. It really doesn't matter to the fans or the viewers, but we normally go out there when they start the stretching. But now when we go in there now, it's after the stretching and into their little one-on-one position stuff. But instead of the stretching that we see in that window where we're not there, they've added an activation period, which is essentially a warm-up. I don't know what all that entails. I'm sure it's some stretching. I'm sure it's some, whatever the case, some kind of ramp-up type stuff. But I like the idea that they're trying something different to address the soft tissue injuries. And that is not just for the sake of change. That is the deliberate, we're trying to get healthier. We're trying to prevent some injuries here, and hopefully this is the way to do it, because something had to change about the practice routine. You can't keep losing guys in practice. Yeah. So they changed that up. As for the energy, Derek Carr said something interesting today. He said he's never ran that many plays in a practice in his career. Now, normal Wednesdays, I think you're doing your first down plays and some other stuff. They ran, and he said it was very, very, very fast-paced. So maybe that was an issue. Maybe things were a little lethargic. Maybe they weren't getting quite through everything they needed to get through. Maybe that was an issue, but I'm sure that was by design. The other big thing, he tweaked the locker room. Okay, again, this doesn't seem like a lot, but like psychologically, you're stimulating the brain here with these guys. Okay, now I'm not over there. Now I'm over here. Because after COVID, they spread these guys out because they didn't want a whole position group getting infected and all that stuff, catching the virus. So they were spread out, and no one really brought them all back together. Well, now position groups are back together. Quarterbacks over here, O-lineman over there, D-lineman over here, tight ends over there. You get the point. That's the other thing. And then the last thing, another change. With the shuffling there's a ripple effect. DA goes. Rizzi has to get promoted to interim head coach, so he can't be the full-time special teams coordinator. That goes to Gagliano. But then there's some other things. DA is also defensive play caller. Now Joe Woods is the defensive play caller, and instead of Joe Woods flying blind with that, they've elevated, I don't know if you call it elevated, but they've reshuffled and taken Todd Grantham off the D-line and made him a senior advisor to help Joe Woods, kind of in a game day assistance management type stuff. And now Brian Young, who's been with the organization forever as a player and as assistant, is now hands-on with the defensive line, coaching those guys. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of shuffling that, it took you all of 5 minutes to notice. It was all right in front of you. So not just change, but obvious change. And change designed to just break routine, because the routine, like it or not, was part of the reason that led you down this 2-7 path. And then also, I love the idea of being more mindful of in-practice injuries. So if this works, God bless them. If it doesn't, maybe they're just cursed or whatever when it comes to injuries. But I think they're at least trying. And I think the message is embrace the change. And that is where I think the players are connecting. Because I didn't feel a bad locker room vibe this year. I felt more tension in the locker room last year. This year, it was almost like they all got along. Everybody was friendly. It was almost just like an acceptance that they just weren't good enough with the injuries or whatever the case may be. But I felt like it was a little lively out there today, so it was a good scene.
Yeah, and when everybody who knows Darren Rizzi has talked about Darren Rizzi, they've talked about a certain energy that he brings. And that energy is what can carry the Saints throughout this second half of the season, because they still have 8 games left. And you kind of heard it as the first half of the season progressed. You could hear it in how they talked. You can see it in how they played. they were giving up on Dennis Allen. He was starting to lose that team. Richard Sherman, Super Bowl champion, watched the game against Denver, just the first half alone, and said they are playing like they are trying to get their head coach fired.
Yeah.
And obviously
Man,
the players,
did that prove prophetic or what? My
exactly,
goodness,
right.
God.
Players are going to deny it. Coach
Yeah.
is going to deny it. But the proof is in the pudding, or in this case, it's on the football field, on the turf. That's what wound up happening. The players just did not have that energy. They did not have whatever you needed to win, and that's what Darren Rizzi is hoping to bring in. Now, I'm not expecting Darren Rizzi to necessarily revolutionize this team from an X's and O standpoint, but a new voice goes a long way. Little things like moving the offense over here, moving the defense over here, moving the locker room around to where now you've got Hainers, Rattler, and Carr all together in the locker room. You've got Foskey with Chase Young and Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan. Just little changes like that as a fan you just gloss over. But for the guys who have to go in there every day, it does make a big difference. And this is a big 2-month stretch for Darren Rizzi, because one thing he said in his press conference today, talked to the media for over 30 minutes. He said that
Yes, he did.
It was a long one.
He kept going and going.
Yeah. He said he aspired to be a head coach in the NFL. As pretty much every assistant head coach does. Everybody wants to be a head coach in the NFL. Now, he said this isn't exactly how he hoped to get the job, but it's the one he's got. And I know from a Darren Rizzi perspective, he hopes that his head coaching career lasts longer than 8 games, whether it's with the Saints or whether he impresses with this stretch and is able to go get a head coaching job elsewhere. Darren Rizzi wants to be a head coach in the NFL. So for him, the next 2 months are an audition. So he's going to bring whatever energy he's got to do. He's going to do whatever he can do to get the most out of a roster that is not bad. This is minus Chris Olave, Eric McCoy, I guess Marshon Lattimore now. So you're missing a few key players. For the most part, this is a roster that started off as the hottest team in football. And you still got enough on the defensive side. You still got after the first 2 games, the guy who was the #1 head coaching candidate, Clint Kubiak, as your offensive coordinator. You've got enough. I'm not going to say to make the playoffs. I think that ship probably has sailed, but you've got enough to finish this season with energy and finish this season. I think my original prediction was 6-11, 4-4 down the stretch. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and look, 4-4 is not going to get him this job, but 4-4 could kind of put him on the radar for some other jobs, especially if it's noticeable how much they're playing for Darren Rizzi. One thing I hope has happened, because everyone tells me, and he says it as well, is Darren Rizzi does not pull any punches. He says what needs to be said in a very direct fashion. They have now gotten rid of Dennis Allen, okay? So, like we said before, the boogeyman is gone. The guy y'all pinning it all on, the guy who's everyone, it was always his fault. Well, he's out. I hope with Rizzi comes accountability. And I hope with accountability comes a direct conversation, because you could probably go down that roster and probably pinpoint 10 to 12 players that may not look like it on the surface because it got clouded with the coaching hysteria, but are not doing what they need to be doing, and they need to be held accountable. And I hope Rizzi went to each one of them, not after Sunday, before. You're one of the ones we're looking at. You're one of the ones that we feel like needs to do better. You're one of the ones that don't have any attention to detail. You're one of the ones that aren't executing properly. You're one of the ones that at times are taking plays off. I hope those conversations have been had, because that is what's needed. That is what's needed. It is a frank, straightforward conversation. You're not doing what's expected. You need to do better. The whole organization needs that right now. And hopefully Rizzi is the guy to bring it. Like I said, he's got some built-in advantages. He's a very energetic guy. He's a very talkative guy, as we learned today, for talking for 31 minutes. Look, he talks to us every week as special teams coordinator. And from Joe Woods to Clint Kubiak and Darren Rizzi, Rizzi always talked the longest.
Yep.
He's the talker. And he's been a head coach before, and he's been around a lot of interim situations. He said he reached out to a lot of people, Dan Campbell, Chris Tabor. So hopefully it works out. But the Darren Rizzi era is here. Ready or not, here he comes. And good for him. I hope the players respond, and I hope they have the amount of success that they need. And look, crazier things have happened. If you can lose 7, like Foster said, you can win 7. And I don't foresee that happening, but I do expect a different level of energy come Sunday against the Falcons.
I like what you said about the Saints essentially being out of scapegoats.
Right.
There's no Sean Payton anymore. There's no older Drew Brees who didn't necessarily have the arm that he once had. And before, Dennis Allen was the scapegoat. Not that he didn't earn and deserve that criticism, because he did. But before it was him, it was Pete Carmichael.
Right.
Pete Carmichael's in Denver now.
That's a great point.
Then Dennis Allen's gone now. If this team continues to do some of the things that it did, there's only one or two places to look. In the locker room, at the players that you've signed and you've got going on the field every Sunday, or in the front office at the people who signed those players.
You know what's interesting is, what if they mess around and flip this season around? You know what I'm saying? Like, what if they do make a crazy run? You got to take Rizzi seriously at that point, because as we sit here right now, I don't foresee that happening. I do expect him to have a little bit more success, a little more energy, as we said. Favorable-ish schedule, but they're favorable to everyone else. But right now, as they stand here, I want someone with zero ties to the Saints as the next voice. But if they make a miraculous run, you do have to take Rizzi seriously. But before you get the miraculous run, you got to get one, and hopefully they get that on Sunday against the Falcons.
Yeah, you know, game 2 against the Falcons, after a game 1 that you really shouldn't have lost. It was 26-24, and the Falcons' offense didn't score. It was a very winnable game that the Saints played against Atlanta in Atlanta. Now they come to New Orleans. It's the fiercest rival that the Saints have. I would not be surprised to see them leave the Superdome with a win. I think this team is re-energized under Rizzi. I think this team has a chip on their shoulders, something that they want to prove. And I would not be surprised to see the little bit that they didn't get in week 4 this week.
The last time the Falcons were in New Orleans, the next day, their coach got fired. The next time they returned to New Orleans Sunday, the Saints coach would have been fired. Crazy symmetry there. But anyway, we got to get out of here. For Andre Johnson Jr., I'm Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.